Reformation can be simply defined as making changes to improve something. However, it is not that simple. In the United States, Reformation largely occurred during the 1800s.
People questioned the rights of those who weren't white males. Would slavery be abolished for good? How would African Americans be treated if it was? Would the common belief that women were inferior to men still stand? These are just some of the questions that Americans asked themselves during the time of reform.
Today, it is hard to imagine that not long ago, people were treated cruelly in the very country that we live in based on race and gender. Social reform, religion, and education were also a very large part of the changing world during this time.
Americans wanted to find a utopia. The Second Great Awakening sought to find peace but only stirred the nation. People with strong opinions took action to change the world.
Now it's time to dive deeper into their stories and how their spirit of reform changed the world.
Let us begin with Dorothea Diggs, a social activist with an inspiring story. So, tell us, Dorothea, what would you describe yourself as?
I'm an activist, a social activist.
What encouraged you to become a social activist?
Well, I used to be a school teacher. Then one day, I was visiting a prison and I saw things I could never erase from my memory. Prisoners were chained to the wall and nearly freezing to death. A lot of them didn't have heating or much clothing. Some of the prisoners weren't even guilty of anything. They were just suffering from mental illness. After that experience, I couldn't stop thinking about those cruel conditions. So I dedicated the rest of my life to educating the nation about the terrible conditions and unfair treatment of the mentally ill. Most people didn't know about all the things I saw. If they did, they would have wanted to do something about it too. Those people weren't being treated right, and something had to happen. Power comes in numbers, so I told the people, and then it became our fight.
Do you think that many social changes in regards to prison conditions and the mentally ill were a result of your actions?
I educated the public, and the public fought back. So yes, in a way, I guess they did.
During the 1800s, many people, just like Dorothea, were trying to make the world a better place.
Some even tried to improve society by forming utopias.
Revivals took place as people became more interested in religion. This era became known as the Second Great Awakening.
The First Great Awakening took place in the 1700s. The Second Great Awakening took place in the 1800s, just around the same time as social reform.
Dorothea Diggs was not the only one who wanted to make the world a better place.
Social activists also fought to improve education, lives for those with disabilities, culture,
and even government. Horace Mann believed education was key to society because it led to more people capable of doing more difficult and specialized jobs.
Another example of a social reformer is Thomas Gallaudet. He wanted to help people with disabilities because he believed that they deserved the same rights as others.
So, in 1817, he opened a school for the deaf in Hartford, Connecticut. He was able to develop a method for teaching people with hearing disabilities.
Today, people with disabilities are able to enjoy many of the same rights as others. This is because of many of these social activists.
Social reform was a very important part of reform in the 1800s. However, many other things were changing as well.
Perhaps the biggest one was the end of slavery. Let's take a look at just one early abolitionist, Benjamin Lundy. Charles, why don't you tell us a little bit about your father?
He's a good man with strong beliefs. We're Quakers. Many of our people disagree with slavery, my dad especially, but lots of other people agree with it. They don't see anything wrong with slavery, or they're just ignoring it for their own good.
What's your view on slavery exactly?
I have a similar belief to my father's. Slavery was wrong, and it needed to end, no matter what the economy would look like after. All people were created equally and should be treated that way.
Do you think your father made a difference?
Yes, I do think my father made a difference in abolishing slavery, and I'm extremely proud of it. Slavery was a cruel part of history, and I'm glad my father had a role in ending it.
What actions did he take in an effort to end slavery?
He wrote a newspaper called The Genius of Universal Emancipation. He wanted to spread his ideas and opinions. His goal was to convince others to become abolitionists and gain enough support to bring slavery to an end.
Did he talk to you about what he did?
He talked about his work and his dreams for the future of our country often. He told me that if he didn't accomplish what he wanted in his lifetime, he wanted my sisters and I to do so. He didn't go into details, but he expressed his goals, and we could tell how much he wanted to change the world.
Slavery was abolished in 1865. However, it wasn't an easy or quick process.
Many abolitionists fought to end slavery until it finally happened.
The actions of each of these individuals made a difference and helped put an end to slavery.
Abolitionists had been trying to do this since long before the 1800s, but at this time, their cause was growing.
Many Quakers, such as Benjamin Lundy, were abolitionists.
Most Northerners were also against slavery, and many Northern states had already abolished slavery.
During the early 1800s, the South's economy relied greatly on slavery. Slavery was actually increasing due to increased production of cotton in the South.
Some people worried about the effect that African Americans would have on society. There was even a plan set to send African Americans to Africa to start a colonization there. However, this plan and many others failed and even increased slavery.
Some wanted slavery to end gradually, while others wanted it to stop immediately. For example, William Lloyd Garrison wrote a newspaper called The Liberator.
He called for an immediate end to slavery and gathered support by many anti-slavery groups in New England.
Of course, there were also many African American abolitionists in the North. They also wrote newspapers and tried to gather support from others to put an end to slavery.
Samuel Cornish and Josh Russwurm were just two freed African Americans that tried to end slavery. They started the first newspaper run by African Americans called Freedom's Journal.
One of the best-known African American abolitionists was Frederick Douglass. He also wrote a newspaper to put an end to slavery. He was a powerful speaker and convinced many Americans to fight against slavery.
It took many powerful abolitionists and brave acts like these to start the journey towards freedom. However, this angered many white Southerners.
This broke up the once united nation between the North and the South. During the same time, women were fighting for their rights. What made you want to become an activist for women's rights?
Well, I had always wanted more rights for myself and for my peers, but I never did think that I'd actually be able to do something about it. Us Quaker women get a lot more rights than other women, but anyways, one day I was at an anti-slavery convention when I met a nice woman named Lucretia Maud. So, we realized that we both had very strong opinions on women's rights, and so we both realized that we needed to do something about it.
How did you take action about it?
We organized the first ever women's rights convention in Seneca Falls. Over 350 people attended, including 40 men. We called for more rights, including an end to discrimination against women. One of our main points was our right to vote women's suffrage.
What obstacles did you have to overcome?
Well, gaining rights for women was not an easy task. My friend Lucretia used to always tell me that we looked ridiculous and that we should stop, but I told her that if we did not proceed, we wouldn't get the rights we deserved. I started the fight for our rights and others finished it. I showed them what we could have, and I gave them the courage to fight back.
Elizabeth Stanton started the first women's movement in the 1800s. Today, women are still inspired by her act of courage and fight for equality.
During the 1800s, women fought for their rights to voting, education, business, and so much more. The actions of Elizabeth Stanton and Lucretia Mott inspired so many others to do the same.
The Seneca Falls Convention used Thomas Jefferson's original ideas to form the conception that all men and women are created equal and should have the same rights.
Susan B. Anthony led an even larger movement that came later on. She fought for equal pay and education for women and girls.
She also formed the first women's temperance association, called the Daughters of Temperance.
In the late 1800s, women gained the right to vote and continued fighting for many other rights.
Finally, in 1920, women gained the right to vote in all states. Education was also growing widely for women.
Many women educated themselves in fields usually taken by men and proved themselves just as capable.
Many women became the first to succeed in their line of work. This opened up opportunities for others to come, leading to women being accepted in all fields.
Women's rights, slavery, and social activism were undergoing many drastic changes in the 1800s.
We can see the results of this today, where diversity is accepted and all people have the same rights.
If it weren't for these early activists and reformers, we may not live the lives we live today. Just let me get it all out.
Mine's so hard. First, don't. I already started it.
Wait. I gotta see something.
Come. Ready?
Tell me, you know, I was about to say my name.
fine.
Stop.
Tell
Stop.
me
Or, yeah.
that we looked ridiculous and that we should stop.
Ridiculous.
Ridiculous. We looked
Is it
Living society. Okay.
women being accepted in all fields of work?
No, it's just fields. Okay, cool. That's a wrap, right?
Yeah.
Slavery. He was a powerful speaker. He's a powerful.
Okay, just go.
One of the best known African American abolitionists was Frederick Douglass. He also wrote a newspaper to put an end to slavery. He was a powerful speaker.
Stop.
Into slavery. He was a powerful speaker. I did it again.
Go. Just think about the word powerful. Go.
Powerful.
Go.
Powerful. Okay.
Just do it, okay? It doesn't matter.
Woman's what?